результаты, которые здесь будут показаны, они не были предметом.
What I will be speaking about is not the findings which we did on purpose. That was a kind of byproduct of a project that we did for other purposes, but we just found those interesting, unusual, and worthy of your attention. Regarding methanol, there are many projects now focusing on the east and on the west, and export is prevailing as an interest. If we look at the situation generally, it is not as bright because the price growth of methanol is very slow, and economic forecasts are also very weak. Then we all know that the cost of transportation in methanol globally is tremendous, and it is set to grow further. The Russian Railways is not decreasing its prices. That's another parallel. And the market, which is export market for you now, the market of Europe, provokes certain concerns for me personally, because there are no major drivers which could bring up demand. The more gas is leaving Europe. We know that hybrids and e-vehicles will be ousting traditional fueled vehicles, and therefore demand for methanol as octane boosters will be slower. So it migrates to Europe, and to Asia, and competition in Europe enhances, because there are many sources of cheap gas, and there are many projects of export methanol, including those focused on Europe. Why the story? That is all to say that if we are to think about development of gas chemical production in Russia, then options are very few, those accessible. In the left part of the slide, we say what might happen if in the European market there will be a strong competitive marketplace from other regions. They will push us. The price will drop, and the margin of our suppliers to this market will be at risk. What's the way out? Either to become highly competitive market players, resolving that problem of high transportation costs, create new port facilities so that we could use tankers to take the products to the target market, and we have to increase the per unit capacity to win the competition and to enhance our own competitiveness. The second option is to do something with domestic consumption, and I guess it is important for exporters who are afloat now and who have to make a long way via the rail to export their excessive volumes. At the bottom right part, we see how domestic methanol demand changed over the 5 years elapsed. It didn't grow very fast. Consumption of methanol domestically, processing of methanol did not change in whatever way. It even went down a bit. And this is exactly what we have to pay attention to if we are set on increasing the efficiency of gas to chemical products processing. By the way, I would like to side with whom I don't know who was it who said previously that we should focus on methanol for chemical processing, and everything which is associated for chemical transformation of components of gas is oil and gas chemistry. And gas chemistry is methanol, ammonia, and some other components. So what should we do in terms of increasing or incentivizing domestic consumption? The results which we obtained, the findings, were byproducts. Last year we were involved in a wide and vast screening of various kind of chemical production and the purpose was to see whether it is promising or not to do that in Russia on the basis of certain location and level of investments. Of course, we couldn't do that manually, therefore we came up with an express methodology which enabled us to look into more than 600 various options. And during the processing of this information, it turned out, and I will detail that later, we redid and rechecked certain things, but it appears that the method is quite adequate in terms of ranking products by investment appeal versus competition. And another confirmation that it does work is that in the top 25 positions that we believe are attractive for investments, even though as of 2017 in a certain geography, eight out of those are real projects already happening. And they're now in a certain level of readiness. Some are being already built, others are still designed, but in the group of those top ranking products for investments, there are quite a lot of gas processing products, and that is the byproduct which I mentioned before. By and large, it is most peculiar that those are quite simple things. It's not something which is extremely technology challenging. Those are just simple things that is level 3, 4, 5, 6 of processing. And most interesting products are color-coded here. Some are sulfur-based, and character of demand is different for every such item. There are also kinds of acids, brines, acetates, formates, POMs, EDTA, NT8, certain esters, as you can see from the screen. Just looking at all that, one perhaps can notice then perhaps that those are interesting products and they would find demand, but most likely the Russian market is not big enough to really count for capacity enhancements to cover the market needs to avoid exports. But as it turns out, the market situation in some of the products is quite favorable. This was a kind of revelation for us, and the consumption is in the European part of Russia, whereas the supply is primarily coming from China. That is colossal volumes of cross supply. Origin is Asia, consumption is in Europe. St. Petersburg, Moscow, that is indeed Europe. And that is true for quite many products from this group, because China is a large supplier of such substances to global markets, including the market of Russia. This logistical shield, which kind of protects the Russian market, is not there for the majority of the products, but for this type of products, for formates and for it is very noticeable, and for formic acids as well. It could be up to 45% from the price, and it's an advantage for local producers. We know this when we talk polymers and petchems. Basically, it's all the same here, and it's interesting to see that. To go into the theory domain, well, by the way, if we look in all those products in entirety and the volume of the Russian market and the demand for gas, that would only be from 40 to 60 million cubic meters, not huge volumes. And it's not a major large demand for gas, but it is also an advantage because there is no need to alter transportation capacity to handle the gas. We can just utilize the reserves which we still have. So going into theory as to who might go into this kind of projects, those are greenfield companies, brownfield, existing gas upstream producers, existing specific fraction producers, non-industry investors, and non-industry investors on a cluster-based format, and consumers. And that is a kind of weak points and strong points for every such group. For instance, non-industry investors will unlikely go into this chemical production undertaking because they have no ways to enhance efficiency for the projects. They need the general production infrastructure to save on capex. They don't have feedstock, they don't have the market understanding required, and they do not know how to best operate such capacities. So quite a straightforward consideration comes to mind, and perhaps it explains why we do not have small tonnage gas chemistry as opposed to the situation globally when non-industry investors come into such projects. There are no conditions to do that in Russia, and the only real investors in this area who can do the job and who could be interested are existing producers of syngas and methanol, because they have almost everything to make that happen, apart perhaps the understanding of the market of those specific products. And what you offer in the market is not a product but rather a solution and specifics of distribution, sales and client interaction, which perhaps is not characteristic for all gas chemical industry market players. Another interesting option is a kind of cluster of independent investors who will be using existing infrastructure, driving up consumption of methanol or other types of gases, relying on existing assets. By and large, that is all in terms of my today's presentation. So the logic is that market trends forced to study options of going deeper in the value chains. Therefore, potential market options are still present. There are some challenges from that point of view in Russia. So options, I guess, should be considered to drive up domestic demand and consumption. And so through one or two additional phases of processing of methanol, one could really increase value and make products which are more specific and which find ready demand, such as structural plastics. Some of them are close to metal in terms of strength parameters, but is widely used in mechanical engineering, for instance. And there are very expensive products which could be made out of that. There are niches. CO-based chemistry is still interesting in itself, even without methanol, and substrates for CO2 addition are available in the market. And there are a lot of extensions from PA to polyols. There is, for instance, a supply overhang of polyethylene, butene 1 and butadiene, And that opens options for making polyamides, as I said, and polyols. Acetylene is interesting as well. It is semi-forgotten. It could be interesting in the form of joint SG acetylene production technology. So, well, it's a separate story. Just one more point to mention. If we say that something should be done with methanol, we can go a bit higher and perhaps think about doing things not with methanol, but rather with CO or methane, and thus going into the parallel type of technology that is doing acetylene and syngas in one and the same configuration. And also what I've mentioned, the most efficient options will be capitalizing on existing capacities, using in-house competencies, or bringing industry consultants. Thank you so much.